Hi there folks, and welcome back to the channel. Now in this one we're going to be taking a look at the Project Zomboid developers post known as the Thursdoid, which was posted on April 13th of 2023. Now this one is a bit different, so as I'm writing this I suspect that this video will be longer than usual, but I'll do my best to condense the information as always and make it digestible for you guys at home. If you enjoyed the video, drop it a like and subscribe to the channel for more updates, tips and guides. So first things first, with this update, we're informed this week's post is going to be a bit different than usual, and whilst it may lack a bit of direction, it should provide a healthy insight into the crafting system being developed for Build 42, where the developers got their inspiration for this system, some of the challenges they're currently facing, and what they're aiming for. The devs don't quite have things to the point where they are ready to show it off just yet, so this is the alternative for the time being. It's essentially an in-depth explanation of their thoughts and motivations thus far. The first part of this blog post focuses on the inspiration for the crafting system that is headed our way, and I have to say I wasn't expecting this first one, but I'm certainly not complaining. The team kicks off by essentially saying that a large source of their inspiration for the Build 42 crafting system comes from the extensive tech progression mods of Minecraft. Now, I will admit that whilst I've played Minecraft, I think most gamers probably have by this point, I'm not exactly an expert in the field of Minecraft mods, but I do know some of the more popular ones, and I'm sure some of you folks have more in-depth knowledge than I. They specifically say that in terms of crafting freedom and possibility, they want to be able to provide the similar creative and community experience to ones that these mods can offer in Minecraft. Many members of the Project Zomboid development team have periodically dipped their toes into Minecraft during the course of development, and activities like building machinery, creating pipelines, and laying down wiring to hook up things like conveyor belts. The possibilities of a system like this has served to tickle the brains of the developers, as they put it, for many years now, and they're excited to be exploring this kind of opportunity finally. They do follow this up by explaining that, obviously, they are in a more grounded world than Minecraft is, and it wouldn't exactly be fitting for players in Project Zomboid to be making nuclear reactors in their back gardens of the safe house, or casting rituals to open portals, so it shouldn't be taken as a one-to-one inspiration. The best way I can explain this in this instance is to quote a direct excerpt from the blog post, as I think it really encapsulates the developers' direction. And here's what they say. What we've taken away from our experiences is more the overall spirit of building, of expanding, of obtaining materials, of navigating a very tall tech tree formed from the availability of resources that will finally allow you to explore a new tree and open up new areas of gameplay to the player, rather than the literal experiences of making or crushing machines, nuclear reactors, or ender teleporters. As much as we feel Zomboid is an extremely deep game, it's never hit the bar we've wanted in terms of this area of gameplay. The devs follow on from this to also add that there's a heavy focus on role-playing elements, especially later down the line when NPCs make their way into the game. They say that they'd like to have more of a focus on realism and believability for this system when compared to things like Minecraft, but to provide more interesting co-op and multiplayer experiences through the leveraging of skills and professions. Now, my interpretation of that is essentially that we won't be able to cover all skills in a reasonable amount of time, and that players will have to interact with some other people to get what they want further down the crafting trees. But that's just my interpretation and shouldn't be taken as gospel by any means. They do say though, not to worry if you play single player, as the requirement for this will be replaced by NPCs, and of course there's always sandbox options to fall back on. Now moving on from inspiration, the next section of the dev blog is aimed at believability and extensivity. They start this section off by reminding us that the ultimate goal of the crafting system is to provide a framework for the crafting to expand massively, to allow for a long post-apocalyptic settlement to create everything they need without relying on looting, to alleviate the needs for players to reset their world if they don't want to, and, crucially, gating these extra opportunities in a way that makes sense. The example they give here is that they wouldn't want a burger flipper to have crazy esoteric crafting opportunities like being able to use beeswax or crushed limestone in their crafting panel that seem odd or out of place within the context of a zombie survival story. They go on to give us a bit of context within an example, the example being using metalworking to make a spoon. This is a thing that makes sense in terms of what someone with metalworking skills could produce in the setting, but a spoon is a weird thing to see pop up as a crafting possibility in an urban environment filled with this item. The development team are currently planning on how recipes and crafting possibilities will be presented to players, how to lock them intelligently behind professions and traits, and more crucially nest them away sensibly within a better interface than the one we have currently, while providing enough opportunities to learn them to the player so they don't end up doing what some players have to now, searching for a generator manual for hours around the map. The developers specifically state that nothing is set in stone here, but ideas are forming on a new interface for crafting and building that would provide this stuff to the player in a much more natural way, where the devs can supply plenty of options without drowning the player in recipes that seem useless or weird within their current situation. I'm interested to see how this fleshes out over time. Hopefully we get to see a bit more of this in blog posts especially, because right now I'm of the opinion that whilst the crafting interface we have is functional, it's not particularly intuitive or simple to navigate unless you already know what you're doing with it. That brings us to the next section of the blog post, which is titled Grind versus Interesting Multi-Stage Crafting. This is more of a section explaining a challenge that developers are facing, that being finding the balance between extensive and interesting crafting of items involving multiple stages, potentially multiple methods, multiple skills, and maybe even multiple characters, but not crossing the line where crafting becomes a frustrating or a tedious experience for players. I'm sure that as I'm explaining that to you guys, you can appreciate how difficult of a balance this is going to be. Every player has a different idea of where that line is going to be to cross into tedium, right? The developers reinforce that in the blog post, saying that it's a difficult balance for them and that in the first iteration of the tech tree, they've probably gone a bit too far into tedium in their desire to honor Zomboid's realism. The team are currently in the process of consolidating some of these steps, still retaining multi-profession or multi-skill or multi-step processes to keep crafting interesting, whilst also removing a few steps that may make it more frustrating or more repetitive for players. The developers say it's for this reason that they've been hesitant to share a look at the current crafting trees. They know it's a bit too detailed right now, and they want to make sure that balance is struck correctly first, lest they worry people that crafting is going to be a massive grind. Despite this, they do show us this image, which is a portion of the current crafting trees. Now, they just follow this with the word eek, which is accurate to say the least, I think. Definitely some simplification needed looking at this chart. The next area that the developers dive into is learning and skill grind, which sort of crosses into similar territory as the last segment, but hey ho. This section is focused on the process of learning new skills. The developers lead into this section by explaining that whilst they do want to retain players needing to actively complete activities to level up in a skill, with the vastly expanded skill list coming with build 42, they also want to come up with other ways a player can level up that don't involve building 1000 things after reading a skill book. Basically, a balance between the two. They mentioned that, of course, skill books may not exist later into the apocalypse, when we're taking into account that we could go years down the line, or if you're playing on a more wilderness-focused map. They then mentioned that their test case basically involves making sure that the crafting is comprehensive enough that you can survive and prosper when you literally cannot rely on any looted items. The team are still coming up with ideas on how to approach this, but they do say that the idea of learning recipes for items or buildable tiles, as well as gaining skill XP from observing other players crafting them, is something they're exploring heavily. I really do like this idea. Learning from others is a great way to encourage interaction and community, which I'm all for in the context of Project Zomboid. Again, NPCs will fill this gap in single player once they come along, and in the meantime the developers will ensure that sandbox options provide the tools necessary for solo players to get access to this content without other people to learn from. Another aspect the devs then discuss is the expanded expanded profession and trait possibilities they're looking into. They hope to make much meatier skill bonuses from professions, allowing players to come into a game with a lot more knowledge than they do now in specific areas of the game, given that there will be many more things they're not so capable at. Again, I think this is meant to reinforce interactions with other individuals to learn what you don't know. They also are exploring the possibility of linking recipes and professions that share common skills or concepts together, allowing characters a head start at performing crafting when they have picked up relevant experience elsewhere that could be transferred in practice. Right, next segment, modding. I'm going to sum up this one really briefly because it's a lot of wordage for a pretty simple conclusion, honestly. Earlier in the blog post, the developers mentioned that building something like a nuclear reactor wouldn't be very realistic within the setting, but of course, the beauty of Project Zomboid is that there is a huge modding scene for the game. The developers are aiming to create a system that is grounded in reality, but they also want to provide the tools necessary for modders to go wild, as they put it in this segment. As we know, modders aren't really limited here by things like realism concerns. So far, the developers have kept the crafting within the same familiar scripts and lure that people are used to, expanded with item properties, traits, multi-tile construction for crafting stations, fluids, item or power transmission, and more. They're incredibly excited to see what modders do with this. The last segment of this blog post is essentially pivoted around what kind of stuff we'll be crafting, and the answer here is lots of stuff. While certain stuff might not be relevant when we first start our games, for survivors that keep on trucking for years, there will be professions that emerge years following the outbreak to cover the crafting for the majority of non-electrical items in the game currently, according to the developers. They do give the disclaimer that they'll probably have a bit more of a homemade look to them, all that said. Actions and items mentioned here include things like tanning leather, making glue or soap, spinning wool or making cloth to fashion your own clothing, growing hemp for ropes, glass makers, stone masonry to make some zombie-proof walls, and much more. Essentially, everything a post-apocalyptic town would need to survive and thrive within the setting. They then go on to focus on their plans regarding post-apocalyptic professions, which is essentially that they want to slowly retire the pre-apocalypse professions as time goes on throughout a game session, and introduce new ones that represent professions one would like to have in a more savage and technically regressed post-apocalypse setting. The developers say that single player and multiplayer alike will allow for players to start much further into the Nox timeline than the currently available 6 months later setting, and provide a vastly different experience, and that's exciting stuff. To wrap things up, the developers state that they hope this has helped to provide some insight into why the crafting update is taking so much time to get ready and what they're aiming for. It's a challenge to get all of this running as intended, but one they're intent on completing. It's not clear whether the team will have everything they've designed ready for the first unstable release of Build 42. It's very possible that this will be expanded over time, but they do want to get the core systems in place and enough crafting potential to elevate the late game dramatically before it makes its way out to us. So that's it from me in this one, folks, but since this video was a bit different to the usual Thursdoid, I'd really be interested to see what you guys are hoping for or expecting with the crafting changes coming to Build 42. Let me know in the comments, and if there's anything in this video or the blog post that you're not quite sure about, please don't hesitate to pop some questions down there as well. As always, I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of my existing Patreon subscribers for their support for the channel and for joining our 2 Project Zomboid servers. For those that aren't aware yet, we've been hosting a Vanilla Plus setup on a new community server, which you can gain access to with any subscription on Patreon, YouTube, or even Twitch for as little as £1 a month. Once you've subscribed, join our Discord, linked in the description, and check out the server rules and info channel for instructions on joining. Thanks, folks, and I will see you all in the next one.